This video is about the organism Bacillus cereus. Bacillus cereus is in the same genus as the organism Bacillus anthracis, or the causative agent of anthrax. However, this disease is a little bit less severe. It basically gives you a stomach bug. Bacillus cereus is a gram-positive rod, as you can see here. The rods are arranged in singles, like this one, or in pairs, like the one I circled. This is a spore-forming organism. Remember that endospores are like little life escape pods for bacteria. So basically, every time you see one of these white little dots in the middle of a rod, that's a spore. This little endospore contains all of the genetic information that this bacteria would need to replicate itself, and spores are created when nutrients become limiting. So basically this bacteria said, nutrients in this pool aren't going to last very long. I'm going to create myself a little survival pack, and then I'm going to bug out. They're like the ultimate bacterial preppers. And then this spore lands in a more vegetative environment and can grow again, creating just more gram-positive rods of the Bacillus cereus organism. The spores are visible, as you can see here. Bacillus cereus is also an obligate aerobe, so it requires oxygen for growth. One of the most important things to know about Bacillus cereus is that it produces toxins, and it's the toxins that actually make us sick. And most of the time, when we're thinking about Bacillus cereus, we're thinking about food poisoning. And the most commonplace example of this comes from reheated rice. So if you see a vignette that says something like, student studying has food at a Chinese buffet where they were reheating rice, or a Italian buffet where they were reheating pasta, chances are your organism of interest here, Bacillus cereus, is the culprit. So the actual organism, Bacillus cereus, is ubiquitous. It's present virtually everywhere, and almost all infections come from an environmental source. As it's a spore-forming organism, and we know that spores are very hardy, they are not killed by boiling. So the classic example of people getting sick comes from food held warm, or rice held warm, as it would be at, say, a buffet. And this is because, while the food is held warm, it's not held warm enough to kill the spores. It's also not held warm enough to get rid of the toxins, and it's the toxins that actually lead to disease. The toxins are released as the bacteria die. So while the bacteria are replicating, it's fine. But as they're dying, they're producing their spores and they're releasing these two toxins. The emetic toxin here is a heat-stable, proteolysis-resistant enterotoxin that is pre-formed in the food. This is made while the food is prior to you eating it. It does not require vegetative growth of the bacteria. It's already in the food. What happens is that when you ingest it, you get nausea, vomiting, abdominal cramps, and because it's preformed, it acts really quickly, causing symptoms within 1 to 6 hours of ingestion. And thankfully, it usually resolves pretty quickly too. It'll resolve within 8 to 10 hours. So it's a short one, even if it doesn't feel great. There's no associated fever because you're not having bacterial growth. This is entirely toxin mediated. The secondary toxin that's produced is the diarrheal toxin. The diarrheal toxin is a heat-labile enterotoxin, which actually stimulates the adenylate cyclase cyclic AMP pathway in the intestinal epithelial cells. This leads to profuse watery diarrhea. And this one, though, is not preformed. So this one is going to take a while to show up with these symptoms. So basically, anywhere from 8 to 18 hours later, you'll wind up with this acute onset of profuse watery diarrhea, which may or may not follow the nausea, vomiting, and abdominal cramps that were given to you by the emetic toxin. This is associated with meat or vegetables and is not preformed, as I mentioned, but it's produced by the bacteria after ingestion. The classic example, as I mentioned with this, is kind of, they call it the fried rice 24-hour bug. No one in the morning gets sick. So if you're going to a buffet and they cook the rice and they made the rice and then they put it out, they boiled it. There hasn't been time for the emetic toxin to be produced. So no one eating in the morning gets sick. But later in the day, as the organisms multiply, the nutrients begin to be limiting. So this is your nutrient load that's now limiting. As they become limiting, the toxicity builds up, the bacteria starts to die, and at this point, the toxin formation starts to come up. So once the toxin formation starts to come up, now the people who are eating later in the day are more likely to ingest that preformed emetic toxin. The treatment is supportive to control symptoms, anti-nausea medication, rehydration, and prevention is geared at proper food preparation and storage. Boiling the rice will not kill the bacterial spores. They'll germinate when the rice is held warm, but at too low a temperature to kill the bacteria. As they grow on the rice, they produce the emetic toxin. So food has to be kept cold to prevent growth or kept at a high enough temperature to kill the vegetative bacterial cells when they try to grow. Occasionally, if there's a really severe infection, you might be able to give fluoroquinolones or vancomycin, but you really aren't going to be treating this. And that's all there is to say about Bacillus cereus.